agro-processing infrastructure and energy demand. My name is Nico. I'm the CEO of the consulting company INENSUS, and some of you may know me as the host of the podcast, The Mini-Grid Business. I'm delighted to be the moderator of this interesting session today. To set the scene, I would like to invite Patricia Mbogo from the Access Coalition to the stage and provide an introductory presentation. Patricia is an international development specialist currently leading global policy and advocacy work on energy access and just energy transition initiatives targeting electrification, clean cooking, and decentralized renewable energy. So as the executive director, she provides strategic and operational leadership, driving policy and advocacy work to influence multilateral development banks to increase investment in energy access. Accelerated implementation strengthen evidence for an enabling environment for SDG 7 and strengthen the civic space for inclusive multi-stakeholder engagements. Patricia, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Nico, for that great presentation and introduction of who I am. Yeah, my name is Patricia Mbogo. I work with a network of, that's us. So today, we'll be looking into this session on agro-processing infrastructure and energy demand in Africa. But my focus more will be on demand enhancement and supporting services. We have had in the last 2 days we have had in the last sorry for that. Let the people do their work and then we'll be able to communicate. I think we are good. So for us, we'll focus more on demand enhancement. In the last 2 days, we have heard more about the balance sheets, the cash flows within our banks, and looking into our ecosystem of how our businesses can thrive. And so for me, I'm coming from a different heart altogether, the civil society fraternity, and I'll be telling you why I'm standing in front of you today. So as I proceed, so you'll be able to see more about our mission, our vision of what we are aspiring to be able to pursue. But mainly our focus areas evolves around 4 key pillars. One is on transforming energy financing, where we are looking in regard to the cash flows or the disbursements that are happening within the multilateral development banks, priority being AFDB and the World Bank, because they are the large financiers of energy access in the space. What instruments have they put in place and who is benefiting out of them? We know that there's a lot that is happening, and especially currently under the Mission 300 initiatives, our push is on financing instruments that will be able to reach out to the people who need it most. And I'll be showing you the statistics so that you can understand from where we are coming in from the civil society fraternity. So we are asking more on the decentralized renewable energy system kind of instruments that will be able to push some of the discussions that we have been having in the room, and even in the morning there's another session I attended. And it is looking in regard, where are the end users coming into the discussions of the solutions that we are trying to inject into the market? Do they come into our discussions, or they come in at the tail end? We are also pursuing issues of strengthening the enabling environment, and this is where we work with the national government in the area of policies and also the strategies that are being either developed, updated, and also implemented. Are they implementable, and who are the custodians of those policies, strategies, the regulations that are coming in, and where are the communities, and especially the last mile community, where do they come in into that ecosystem? We provide technical inputs towards that process, but also we wear another hat of deserving accountability in the targets that we are setting for our countries of context in where we work. The other pillar is on scaling inclusive energy, cross-sectoral energy planning. Mainly, and as you may see, and you may have seen in the past and even in other previous discussions, is that energy discussions evolves around Ministry of Energy. You not miss Ministry of Energy in these discussions. But we know that energy is a nexus issue that cuts across agriculture, health, industrialization, and we need to bring those state departments into the ecosystem so that we can look holistically into providing solutions that meet the needs of the end users, but not only operating through fragmented approach. In the morning, I was in another discussion. So you facilitate the connection. But if that connection does not yield to production or does not yield to meeting the needs of that household, it does not really transform. Would look into a connection that is facilitated. It is able to meet the needs, the primary needs, but also transforming the households in regard to their livelihoods, and also they can also use the energy for productive use so that even in their income streams, they can be able to be enhanced. And our last pillar is looking more on inclusive energy governance and decision-making processes, where we are asking the people at the top level, and these are the global leaders, including the financiers, the multilateral development banks, and the DFIs. How inclusive are their processes? Who makes decisions and who decides? Which countries needs the solutions that they are offering, the financial instruments? And do those countries absorb? Can they adopt? Or are we coming up with financial instruments that it is only a few that can be able to access, and we are leaving out larger populations into the continent, especially in sub-Saharan Africa? And in my next slide, we'll be seeing all this. So we are calling more for participation of the communities in, at the design phase of identifying what are the local needs, engaging the civil society organizations, who mostly are the people who will be able to bring the voices of the communities into such platforms. If I may ask, like in this room, do you have a community or a farmer attending this workshop? So we need people who are talking, bringing their perspectives into such rooms so that you can understand what are their pain points and what instruments do we really need to plan and put in place even as we implement our programs across the various projects we are executing. I'm going to project some numbers, and these numbers, they tell a story, and they tell a story why I'm here. These are the people who employ me because they don't have someone who is advocating them. We also have other NGOs, civil society organizations that are in this space, and this is the constituent that we talk about. For example, if you may look, Africa is really growing. And as it grows, by 2050, we are talking of will be 2.1 billion. So we have to think ahead before we reach there. What programs, what mechanisms do we really need to put in place to ensure that by 2050, we are able to provide solutions that will meet the needs of this population? So what is there and where we are going, there's a variance. And we have to think in regards to the planning of what really needs to happen. We are also seeing that 90% of livelihoods now are supported by agriculture in sub-Saharan Africa. And this means that these are small-scale holder farmers. We are here talking of agro-processing. These are not larger agro-processing industry that we are speaking about. These are households levels where What currently they do is I farm, or I do farming in my farm, I feed my family. Nothing goes out of my farm. And so these families will continue thriving in that energy poverty, will continue thriving in economic poverty because they don't have cash flows that goes into other needs to be able to develop, that they can be able to improve their livelihoods. We need to go beyond a connection to ensure that these households we are able to transform their lives economically so that they can be able to thrive. We are also seeing to 50 million people currently are undernourished in sub-Saharan Africa. So if we are saying we have resources, we have the farms, why should we be talking in such an era that people are being malnourished? It is because even where agriculture is thriving, most of the farm produce goes to stale because they don't have the facilities, the cold rooms to be able to store. They don't have the facilities for processing so that this farm produce can be processed, can be stored, and can be deployed to areas that they don't have the food. So we need to think broader than looking into that particular segment of the population, but looking ahead of if agriculture is thriving in this area, who else needs to benefit? And we come up with infrastructure projects that will be able to meet the needs of those population. Again, we are seeing $4 billion of annual post-harvest grain losses every year in sub-Saharan Africa. And this is the same thing that we don't have storage for the farm produce. If you go to areas where agriculture is thriving, the small-scale holder farmers, the agro-processors, they tell you that they really struggle. Yes, it is there, but they cannot be able to store beyond a certain period of time. Those are opportunities that are existing, and if we're able to facilitate the linkages from the farm produce to the storage, to the processing, to the market, then we'll be talking that we are really doing much to transform the communities, the populations that we really need to be thinking about. In Africa, we have also seen that only 2% of electricity goes to the agriculture. Why? And we are saying that agriculture is the backbone of sub-Saharan Africa. We really need to do more. That tells us that majority of the population in sub-Saharan Africa is left out from the ecosystem. So it's only a few who may be benefiting from the connections that are being facilitated, and we need to go beyond that. And again, 600 million people without electricity in the age and era that we are speaking about. AFDB and the World Bank have come up with an initiative called Mission 300. And they are targeting to electrify 300 million people through Mission 300. Our call in regard to that implementation of M300 is, who are the beneficiaries? Are they reaching out to the last mile population in sub-Saharan Africa that needs the energy most? Or are we deploying solutions within a population that has already been transitioned to one form of another technology to another solution? So we really need to think beyond this to ensure that the 300 million people that will be electrified with Mission 300, all the agro-processors who may be reached out through the Mission 300, that they can be able to do more and their farm produce can be able to penetrate and be injected into the market. So we are calling for aggregation. We have seen the cooperatives, movements within the communities that really need to be strengthened. So there are two issues here as I continue. There's the issue of the financing. It is debt heavy, and the agro-processor may not be able to absorb such a financial instrument. So we are calling more for PROPUA, financing instrument, concessional, and grants, so that they can be able to absorb such innovative financial instruments to be able to do more within what they're doing in their countries of context, to ensure that we are transitioning everyone into that space. Debt will not be able to take us more and further. it is only a few that can be able to absorb what the financial instruments on the debt can be able to apply. The other issues in regards to the issues of planning. Our planning is more siloed and fragmented. We really need to do recursive planning where different ministries comes together and they are able to work and plan, getting to understand what are the needs within the Ministry of Energy portfolio, what are the energy needs within the agriculture, within the health. So we have an integrated energy planning that meets the local needs of the communities. Then we'll be able to deploy the resources available into a more efficient and effective manner to be able to transform the communities that we are working with. So 2 issues as I close this session and hand it over to Nico, is that we are calling more for inclusive capital and working capital that has an element of the pro-poor, the concessional and grant-based financing, and we are calling for cross-sectoral integrated energy planning where we have different state departments working together and multi-stakeholder engagement, and the communities and the civil society, the private sector, we need to get into the room together and discuss and meet the needs of the communities that we want to transform. As I hand over, I look forward to, and I wish all the best for the panelists who will be joining us, and it is good to hear if they're given $1 extra, how will that transform the communities where they serve? Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Patricia. 90% of the households depend on agriculture. Only 2% of the electricity is being used in the agricultural sector. That shows how large the challenge is, how large this opportunity is. Let me welcome my panel here today, and we start from the left-hand side. We have our representative for the agro-processing space, Rosalit Raru. She is the head of sustainability at Biofoods, based here in Kenya. Then we have 2 representatives from the electricity supply and equipment installation side. On the one hand, we have Pierre Bukai from MyJulebox over there. And then we have Mufadal Mula. He is the director at Buhari Solar in Mombasa. And on the right, we have the representative from the equipment manufacturer side, which is Konai Kiefer. He's the business development manager for access to energy at Schneider Electrics. And on the further right end from your point of view, we have Katja Tauchnitz, and she represents the financing sector here. And I guess this represents the whole ecosystem, and we can have good discussions today. Rosalit, let me start with you. I heard that you are already deploying solar in your factory. And I would learn, or we would all like to learn a little bit more about how you do business and how this deployment of solar in your factory changed the way you're doing business and what it meant or what it still means to your company. Keep it pressed.
Thank you so much. Yes, so we've had solar panels for a while now, since 2020. And I'm going to end with how that has changed the business for us, but I think it's also important to point out on how initially it didn't really make much sense for us. So we are a company that has sustainability as its main pillar. So there's quality, there's lifestyle, there's sustainability, they're all at the same level. And we decided that we wanted to try and go green as much as possible. So we installed solar panels in 2 phases. One phase was a smaller one, and then the second phase was maybe thrice as much. This was financed because, of course, the initial cost for that would have been very, very capital intensive for us. So when we got the solar panels, I remember at the time I wasn't working in sustainability, I was in the quality department, and I'd always hear complaints from the technical team and the senior management that we're not seeing the savings that we're supposed to be seeing, only to figure out much later, which was 2 years, 3 years later, that solar is not a solution by itself because we do not have batteries, so we rely on the sun and we cannot predict that. But there are so many things that can be done to make solar quite reliable. So one of the things we did is we went back to the manufacturer's instructions. How often do you clean? How often are the inverters serviced and also checked by technical guys? And then the other thing that was very important for us is proper planning of the production. So if you have energy-intensive production processes at night, it does not make sense because the solar works during the day because we do not have batteries. So that was a conversation that had to be had. And at that time, we realized that this energy thing is not just a one-department thing. It's not a sustainability thing alone. There's technical, there's the supply chain planner, there's the demand planning, there's all that, there's a production team. And we did all these changes, and now how we are running business is that we have, at a minimum, 29% of our energy covered by solar, and on a very good month, like in January or February when it's not raining, we have up to 45, 46. The best I've ever seen was 48. And from, I think anyone who's a local here is going to tell you that electricity cost has just been going up. It's just never gone down ever since that 2021. So the savings we were even anticipating back in 2021 are much, much higher right now, and it makes more financial sense. Because the other thing is when you're in this line of work, you also have to be in constant alignment with the finance team. So it makes more financial sense right now. So that's what solar is doing for us. From a sustainability perspective as well, that's very good because that's zero in terms of emissions, as much as the Kenyan energy is very green. But from a financial perspective, it's very, very good because that's an average of 38% at the end of the year.
All right, thank you, Rosalit. Go a little bit deeper and tell us how this actually works out in real life. Like, what are you producing? How does the raw product come in? What is it actually that you're producing? And how does the solar energy, as you said, like it's an integral part, so to say, of your overall system, how do you adjust the way you're processing your products when solar comes in?
Okay, so for those who don't know.
First, tell us what BioFood actually produces.
Yes, okay, I assumed everyone knew, sorry. BioFoods is a premium dairy company here in Kenya. So we produce yogurt, we process milk. We also have a sister company in the same business called Macuisine that produces condiments. So we have jams, we have ketchups, we have mayo, all that. But the largest volume of what we produce is dairy. So that means our main raw material is milk. That in itself requires a lot of energy because there's a lot of chilling. And it's not just from scope 2 perspective of energy, which is in the factory. It's also from a scope 3 perspective from the farmer's side because we collect our milk chilled in jacketed trucks. So there's a lot of energy consumption in the process. So in terms of the exact process, we rarely change on a day-to-day. We changed back then, and it has been consistent because when milk comes in, it has to be weighed. The weighing of it uses a digital weighing machine that doesn't consume a lot of energy. The chilling aspect of it can never really change because milk has to be chilled throughout. But the aspects where we did manage to make a lot of changes was the pasteurization. We have 2 pasteurizers that consume a lot of energy. We have homogenizers. We do have shrink tunnels for end products, which those ones consume a lot of energy as well. So we did put shrink wrapping to be done during the day, which actually saves a lot. So if you start by 7, you'll probably be done by maybe 4, 5. So on a very sunny day, between 10 and 3 p.m., you're running the company entirely on solar. So that means your shrink packing is consuming solar, your pasteurization of at least the larger amount of milk is actually using solar, And because majority of the people work during the day, come to work at 7 and then leave at 4 or at 8 and 5, then the rest of the people in the admin are using solar, mostly solar to do that. And then finally, we also integrated the grid with the solar, because one of the things we realized is when there was a flicker, which happens a lot in Nairobi, when there's a flicker, the inverters go off. And then when the lights are back, the inverters don't just turn themselves on automatically, so you have to send someone to turn them on. With this integration, solar would give us as much as it can, then whatever is missing, the electricity adds on to that, and then there is no more power. When it flickers, the system shows you, so someone can actually do it quite fast. So that's a practical way of how we do it.
Yeah, I think Konai has to say something about switching on automatically, but let's wait for that. Because I guess with nowadays, like modern technology, that is definitely not needed anymore. But let's go to Mufada first. You're active in Kenya, and especially in the coastal areas, right? Now I would like to understand if, what solar system you're delivering into what value chains?
Burhani Solar is an EPC based on the coast of Kenya. We started mostly in the agro-processing industry with solar water pumping systems, and recently cold chain facilities. Solar water pumping systems, I think, completely changed the game for farmers, not just for farmers consuming a lot of electricity, but also farmers in the off-grid areas, because they used to use diesel generators, and some had no way to use anything. Yeah.
So you are actually active in the on-grid, in the weak grid, so to say, and in the off-grid space.
Yes.
Right, okay, we'll come back to that later. Let's go to Pierre. Pierre, you're active in West Africa mainly, Benin and DRC, and you're really in the off-grid space. Now, what drove you into rural areas? And what are you doing there, actually?
I think it was in my Julebox DNA from the start to be focusing on energy access and delivering quality products, reducing the cost of solar for everyone. So off-grid energy was a bit of evidence for us. So I think that's what drove us there, mostly.
All right. Okay, then let's continue with Konai. We already heard that there are sometimes technical issues. Maybe you want to introduce quickly how your system basically is advanced over technology that was just used a few years back.
Thank you very much. By the way, he's my favorite type of customer. You know, having someone that's passionate about rural development and trying to drive down cost, I think it's what Access to Energy is all about. It's a program that we started in 2009 with the focus of rural electrification, giving access to energy in rural space, but with good quality technology at a very reduced cost. I've been listening to some of the numbers here that they've been saying on producing microgrids, and it is staggering what people are paying where they should be paying 1/3, 1/4. So yeah, Schneider Electric obviously at the forefront of technology with innovative solutions, and we'll maybe talk a little bit later about our Climate Smart Village specifically, but the aim of our initiatives are to be innovative, to provide quality state-of-the-art products and technology, but at a vastly reduced cost, to assist colleagues such as our friend over here in the space of rural electrification and to give access to energy to people in the rural energy space.
All right, thank you. And now we also need funds to somehow pay for all of this, right? Katja, maybe you introduce quickly what CEI Africa, the entity you're working for, actually funds and how you do this.
Yeah. So CEI Africa is a foundation that was created by the German Development Bank KfW, and Triple Jump as an investment manager was mandated to manage this foundation. So I'm representing today Triple Jump and SEIA in personnel union. And CEI Africa's objective is to finance off-grid solution in sub-Saharan Africa. We have two different funding windows. One being a grant window focusing on providing grants for RBF and for productive use of electricity equipment. And our investment window is a little bit more subsector agnostic, meaning we can basically finance any off-grid sector from solar home systems, CNI, productive use green mini-grids. And across the board, we're also providing technical assistance for our grantees and investees.
Thank you, Katja. Now, as Patricia said, the opportunity is huge, right? And I think we all agree that there is a huge potential market out there, but still it's not happening, right? It's not happening at the speed as it could. The potential is just that large, and why are we not getting the systems on the ground? So there are, let's say, early movers like biofoods, right? What is keeping the other industries back? Maybe Rosalie, maybe you want to start. Like, you probably talk to industry peers. Are others following, or do they think, oh, these biofood guys, they are crazy. Why do they go into solar?
I think the simple answer is it's very, very expensive. It's very, very expensive to do that. And
expensive in terms of capex, right?
Yes,
not in terms of expensive in terms of profitability.
Yeah. It's capital intensive, and there are very few. I learned a word that I actually wrote down. There are very many SMEs in Kenya that would want to do that, but the financing that's there is not poor financing. Yeah. That's what I learned today. So most financing, like, you will have a lot of people who are giving you investments of $1 million, $2 million, honestly. Some of these companies are not even worth that. And then if you get the small ones, there's also the small kind of financing. There's a lot of documentation that also is involved. And I like having that conversation with most people, because she will not give you money if you do not have the proper documents in place. There's a lot of ESG conversations, a lot of documentation that is involved, and I think at the time that we got the financing, it was very easy for us because we already had a consultant for sustainability back then, before sustainability became even a big deal here. So there were certain things that were already put in place. So I think the challenge is there is no that proper financing, and even when it is shredded down into small bits of finances, most organizations are not data and documentation ready. And if it's an investment, it only makes sense that there is a level of ROI, and you can't promise someone, this is a business, so you need to put down your documents. So for small organizations, it's purely, for me, I'd say it's purely data and lack of proper documents. And I think she can maybe give us more insights into what that looks like.
Katja,
yes.
What do you respond to the documentation challenge?
I think, unfortunately, she's right. Also from, say, Africa perspective. So first of all, in the productive use of energy space, we're working with more than 40 grantees from very small local companies that are distributing to productive use equipments to one community, to big, well-established distributors of water pumps. So we really have a very diverse range of grantees in our portfolio, and thus their readiness for grants and also for financing is also super diverse. But we do see a couple of topics that we see as challenges for our grantees across the board, and one of the challenges you mentioned is ENS. As an investor that is funded by KfW, as mentioned, we do have rather strict ENS criteria, and especially local companies are not necessarily aware of those criteria or are not ready yet to actually respond and comply to all of our criteria. And we acknowledge this gap in the market, but we do provide technical assistance, for example, to support our grantees in getting their ENS ready. So not complying with our ENS criteria right from the start is not necessarily a criteria for us to kick those grantees out. Rather, we see that as an opportunity to support those companies in getting there. So we see ourselves rather as a first investor, aiming to support our grantees to reach scale and then be investor ready at a later stage.
Okay, Katja, your response to that documentation challenge is basically you provide technical assistance, you provide support. What about standard? You said they are diverse, right? But I still think like a solar system, like one system next system, they're not that different, are they? Right? Like, what about standardization? What about making the process streamlined?
Yeah, in our case, we're focusing on, well, we don't have one specific subsector in terms of productive use of electricity. We do finance agri-processing, so milling, water pumps, cooling was also mentioned. But we also have projects in the productive use space on e-mobility or bigger solutions that are not plug and play, but rather turnkey solutions from big warehouse. And we intentionally did not say, okay, we're only financing water pumps that are plug and play, because we wanted our grantees to choose the technology that is best fitted for their customers and for their communities. But yes, it does lead to a challenge in terms of documentation, because we're so diverse. We cannot provide. Yesterday, for example, I was asked by one of our grantees, can you not provide us with a list of technology that's actually eligible for us? And the simple answer is no, sorry, we can't. We're basically open to everything and anything. But yeah, it is a challenge, and it would be great if there would be support from maybe donors or associations on working on the enabling environment that goes a little bit beyond our scope. Yeah.
All right, and I agree to a certain extent that even within the solar space, there's a certain, the systems are diverse in terms of, as we said before, on-grid, weak grid, off-grid, different types of systems, different types of solutions, different types of technologies partly also. And then we also have the different sizes, right? So a rural household processing some agricultural produce for their own consumption has a completely different technical setup and a different requirement for finance compared to far on the other end, the industrial processing line with 200 employees in the factory, right? With that, I would like to ask you, Pierre and Mufadal, what is your experience with the different types of demands? How do you adjust to that? What type of technologies do you deploy, and how do you design the systems?
So yeah, for us it's a bit of an interesting question, because we are indeed in both the CNI space, which is usually connected to the grid, and we're also in the mini-grid space. So you'll have total opposite business models. For the first part, which is connected to the grid, we love agricultural and processing facilities because for us they're great clients. And would be happy to discuss the financing issue, which we do believe it's an issue as well. We're raising funds and trying to lend to our clients and prospects to help them finance the plant. But in those cases, what you're going to do is that you're going to do a tailor-made, self-consumption basis solar plant. And I was a bit surprised about what you were saying earlier about, for me, it was a bit the responsibility of the one providing the solar solution to accompany you on how to optimize your production and how to add batteries, size the system and everything. So that's for the CNI part. And for the mini-grid part, completely different. Here for the mini-grid, agriculture is basically for us a way to enhance demand on the mini-grids, because quick story of mini-grids started, the first wave in 2020, something like this, and people expected that just by providing energy, people would consume energy, and it was a bit of a disappointment when we realized that wasn't the case. So we thought, well, we need to maybe get into helping people consume more electricity. And as we said already, agriculture is the backbone of sub-Saharan African economy, especially in rural areas. So what are we going to target? Agriculture. So in one case, you're really working about factories, you're thinking about, okay, this is their load curve, I need to tailor it specifically to their needs, and I need to make it as lean as possible for them and maybe provide a financing solution for them to buy my product. And a second case, you're really trying to build a ecosystem driving economic development on the back of agriculture, but in a sense, if it's agriculture or if it's something else, it doesn't really make an impact for you. Agriculture is just that it's the activity that's there. But we don't really need to tailor it to tailor our products to the specific of the agriculture.
All right, so my company also operates mini-grids, right? And we've been playing around a lot with productive use of electricity, and what we learned is that if you try to support productive use for local consumption, right, like productive use that produces products for local consumption, for local markets, there's usually not a huge scale-up effect, right? It's relatively limited, and you basically stay at the level that you started with, and that's it, right? Whereas if you try to connect national, international, regional markets to these villages, if you bring these products from these villages, from these rural areas, pre-processed there into the regional, national, and international markets, then you can generate like an offtake, a reliable offtake that channels cash flows into the communities. And we understand that this is actually the way to go to generate demand for systems, solar systems in rural areas. Are you thinking along the same lines?
My take on this is that I guess you're right. I think that would be the way to make productive use of equipment work. And that's what we're trying to do with a project which is called the Sun Caravane du Soleil in Benin, where instead of expecting people to buy equipment, we bring the equipment to the village and we do a whole like roadshow showcasing animation in the villages, etc., to show them how it works. Because sometimes also like you're bringing some equipment that was just never there in the first place. So there's this sense of you need to bring things and not expect those villages to just like take over and take it up themselves. But where I would disagree is that, again, I think we're putting a lot of burden on mini-grid developers and mini-grid operators who, to start with, we're just supposed to sell electricity. And that's already very hard. Like, that's already very, very, very hard, you know? And not a lot of us have like high enough margins to be able to just like put in place international value chains. That's tremendous amount of work. So we're grateful that we're receiving support from great associations, ADA, GERES, other that I could mention. But sometimes I do feel like we are expecting mini-grid developers to, first of all, solve energy access, and then secondly, put in place international value chains and power up economic development across rural Africa. Okay, but then give me more money.
All right, we need partnerships for that. I think we agree on that. But before we go into that, Mufadal, you, as we said before, you are on the C&I side, you're on the off-grid side. So what is the difference in the systems you deploy? And like what technology do you use?
I think something important to address is that not all productive use case scenarios are the same. And sometimes the financing structures are not quite aligned with the energy solutions, matching these productive use case scenarios. So like farming is seasonal. A farmer growing maize is not going to have the same kind of income the way Rosalie's bio is going to have. So I think that needs to be addressed, yeah. And when it comes to sizing the system, it's also important for the system not to be too expensive or underutilized or too oversized. Yep.
All right, okay. Now, coming back to this question we discussed earlier, how do we get rural agricultural products into the markets? And that is a question for Rosalie again, I guess. You're doing that already, right? You're getting your milk from rural areas. You're not supplying electricity there, but you're bringing the cooling, basically the cooling facilities with your trucks, if I understand correctly, right?
No.
No, okay, then correct me.
Yes. So there's still energy being used, but it's not in the trucks. So majority of our farmers would not really be considered very small. We do work with cooperatives, but most individual farmers would not be considered smallholder farmers, which then also gives them access to a bit of financing here and there where they can buy chillers and that. So we require that you chill your milk before we pick it, but we offer transport to guarantee quality. So we pick the milk chilled, and then it's pumped into a jacketed truck, and the jacketed truck is driven to biofoods. So there's chilling at the farm, and then there's chilling at the plant. So if the milk leaves, say, Eldoret at 11 p.m., when it's at 3 to 4 degrees, it will get to the company when it's like 6 to 7 degrees, because that's our quality standard. It has to be below 8. So I guess in between there we've saved. It's just trucks, tanks that are jacketed, that's it. There's no electricity or battery involved in continuing to chill the milk.
If Pierre had set up mini-grids here in Kenya, right, just imagine, and he had cooling facilities in a decentralized manner, would you source the milk from there? Would that help you in your supply chain?
This is my opinion, so if my boss sees this, this is just me. I think yes, because we had to construct an entire collection center because we were getting more farmers. So we had to do the construction, we had to do the leasing, we had to get, there was a lot of capex, involved. So we had to create collection centers, and then we also had to buy coolers that are not very cheap. So I'm assuming if he was there and we gave him our standards because he has a cooling or chilling facility, it would reduce the amount of chaos, because there was a lot of chaos involved in that went there. So we'd not be leasing up a house, we'd not have to do construction. If we ever move, then that's an extra cost, then we'd have to dismantle and return everything. So if he had that there, again, my opinion, in case my boss is around, I think my boss would have moved to your cooling plant.
Yeah, well, returning to that, I think it's interesting because then my opinion as a mini-grid developer would have been, well, I am not in the business of building milk aggregation facilities. I'm in the business of supplying electricity. So why we can do a deal together where I will sell you discounted prices on electricity because you have stable consumption, and for me it's better, and then we can adjust the size of the plant and anything like this. But in a sense, what we would hope is indeed that some companies would come up to us and say, well, it's a nice mini-grid that you have here. I would be very happy to build a factory there. And that we don't have to do this ourselves. And as of today, it's true that we do this ourselves. We have to, because well, nobody else is doing it, and for us, there's a clear incentive for energy consumption. But yeah, regarding this partnership, I think it's a good question in a sense like in an ideal world, we would not be doing this, but as of today, we have to.
Nico, just
go ahead.
I answered based on his hypothetical question, where in this world, you are having coolers, you had a mini grid and you had coolers. So it was very hypothetical, and if you still had the mini grid at a cheaper rate than the grid, we'd still take it. So for that, I don't even have to think about it, it's just an obvious. But my initial answer was based on Nico's hypothetical question.
Yeah, but I think here we are at the core of the issue, right? Why is it not happening? Why is it not happening? Because we cannot get the product industry matched with the solar electricity producers. And this is the perfect example now. So now, how can we close this gap? I think the gap is like this, right? We're so close, right? If we can close it, and then we look at various value chains and close this little gap in all the value chains, I believe we can open up a huge market. So now, who does the local storing of the milk in your example, right? You wouldn't do it because you're too far off, right? You wouldn't do it because you think you're on the electricity side, it's not your business. Can we bring in any local entity doing it? Or would you take one step towards the other? Or would you take one step towards the other side?
As of today, many grid developers, they do take this step. We are implementing PUE, and especially in DRC, for example, we are implementing like cold chains. We are even implementing like e-mobility solutions for the value chains that you were talking about. So as of today, the mini grid developers are doing that. And there are some PUE grant facilities that CEI was talking about earlier, and that are specifically designed for mini grid operators. And there are also, I should mention, some PUE companies that are emerging. I think there was a company called Agro in Uganda, which was doing great work. So as of today, it's the mini grid developers doing it. But what I'm only trying to underline with a little bit of provocation is that it's a very different business from what most of the companies were founded initially to do, and that it's a very complicated business, and for which we need to put a lot of investment in there. So it's not self-evident.
It's a different business indeed, yeah. And I agree that mini-grid companies are already taking one step. They supply the equipment, right? The productive use equipment, they finance it. But I think the gap is just behind that, right? It's the just very next step, right? Now, who is actually pre-processing the products in the rural areas? Let's keep that question open for now. And ask Mufadal, like, you have been very active also in the beach areas and worked with fishermen, worked also on electricity for that value chain. Have you seen the same issue, the same gap in that value chain? Or do you maybe have like an example where this is actually working, where this gap could be closed?
Well, I think empowering them with the technology does bring that gap closer, but at the same time, we have to address that fishing itself is again seasonal. So a lot of months in the year, those cold chain facilities won't be used or will be used to a lesser degree. Yeah, so I think that needs to be also considered.
All right, thank you. Konai, let's talk about technology, right? Let's talk about what is possible today, right? We've already discussed about solar panels being part of a larger system. And it's not just the electricity generation. The other side is the electricity consumption, right? And all of that needs to be integrated. Demand and supply, they need to react to each other. Like, how are you addressing that?
You know, very good question, but allow me just before I answer that question. I was listening to what you were discussing with the three of them, and you raised a very key point in, I can almost say our job here is done, because that is the biggest barrier. That is why we are failing. It's because that there is no ecosystem that exists. You introduced the panel as a complete ecosystem, and you rightly point out that the biggest issue that we have is that there is no collaboration between the end user, the technology partner, the financiers. And this is the beauty of our Access to Energy program, because that's exactly what it is. We build the ecosystem by bringing the financiers, the end users, the technology partners around the table, and to have these sort of discussions to facilitate whatever the issues is that's around the table and that's stopping the solutions from happening. Technology-wise, where Schneider Electric comes in, is very rightly we then plug the gaps. So if the gap is technology, then yes, there is technology available through the solutions that we provide, through the integration of systems. We can gladly assist her. And we were forced to look at this because if you look at microgrids, like you correctly pointed out, microgrids have got two components, as you said. There's a demand and there's a consumption. The consumption costs money. So you have two options because, unfortunately, and the audience can freely disagree with me, but I'm yet to see a financial business model for a microgrid that makes sense. That will, in a rural area, and that's addressing the elephant in the room, so shoot me if you want to. But there's no business model that suggests that will deliver the rate of returns for a private investor by implementing a rural microgrid in a rural area with a rural community. So at Schneider Electric, we looked at two options. One was to click a finger and increase the affordability or the capital expenditure ability of the community by 20%, or look at the cost of the microgrid and drive that down. So that's where our focus was as a technology expert and a technology provider, was looking at how we can drive down the cost of a microgrid. And fortunately, as we mentioned in the bio through our Climate Smart Village, we've been able to do that because it's not that easy, even through productive use, through increasing the end user channel, the market. It's not that easy to just add 20 or 30% revenue or buying power to a community. So driving down the cost makes the business model, for my other favorite person, Katja, who's the financier and the most important part of the ecosystem, to make it more attractable to them, because also grant funding does not exist anymore. I mean, I'm sure you will be able to confirm that. But simple grant funding does not exist anymore. People expect a rate of return. There's blended finance. There's BRF opportunities. But that just, I give you money or him money and build a microgrid. So I hear you, give me more money. But that does not exist anymore. People does not give us more money. They expect something for that money. And to make this simple, you either need to increase the revenue or you need to drive down the cost of the project.
All right, Katja, I guess there's a lot to respond to from your side. Financials are not talking to the developers. True?
I wouldn't say they don't talk to each other. I would rather say sometimes they don't speak the same language. Sometimes it's a translation topic, which is natural if there's like very enthusiastic engineers that are very into like what kind of technology, trying to talk to hardcore bankers. Yeah, there should be some translation service being provided to actually make each other understand. So yeah, that is a challenge, but I also want to respond to the availability of grants. It's true that we're seeing a huge decline of grants. Well, development funding in general is becoming more and more scarce. At Say Africa, we do offer grants as well. We have awarded roughly 20 million result-based financing grants for green mini-grids being dispersed once connections are made, and roughly $10 million US dollars of grants for productive use of electricity equipment, either standalone solutions or green mini-grid connected solutions. But we've also seen that the demand of grants are like surpassing by far what we can actually offer. In our latest call, we had like roughly 5 million available, and we had requests for 20 million. And there, obviously, we had to make a cut, and there were a lot of innovative, impactful companies, local companies in there, where literally we were running out of money, and that's the only reason why we couldn't give them, award them any grant. But yeah, so grants are still available, but becoming more and more scarce. We see that as well. And as you also mentioned, not any more upfront grants that are only dispersed, but like based on no conditions, basically, but rather RBF grants being dispersed after results are made, leaving a financing gap for our distributors. I mean, even if we're awarding, making up numbers, 100,000 for a local company of grants, and those grants are being dispersed after they are distributing the products and are achieving social impact, then that leaves the distributors still with a challenge to actually buy those equipment and have the working capital to implement it. So yeah, I think it's rather the mix of financing and the sequencing of financing that is a challenge.
All right, thank you. Now let's bring in everyone in the room. Who would want to contribute? Questions, comments? Tell us what you're discussing is all bullshit. We want to hear it. Anyone? We have a comment here. Can we have a microphone here? Is anyone? Okay.
Hello? Yes. Okay, sorry. So,
please stand up and introduce
yes.
yourself quickly.
Maria from AFSI Foundation, not-for-profit organization. Two things. I didn't hear anyone talking about the site selections for mini-grids. I think that at times you visit the sites where mini-grids are, and there's really no possibility to have any kind of development there. So I think this should be something to be taken into consideration, especially if we want to develop. So having this link with already existing value chains, agro-value chains. And the second one is investors are giving more and more funding for productive use of energy to the developers, pushing them to do something they don't want to do, not all the time. We heard they sell electricity. So are they targeting the wrong audience?
Thanks a lot. So the first question, would you be ready, Pierre and Mufadal, would you be ready to first look at the value chains, product value chains, maybe make the linkage to an off-taker like Rosalie, and then only decide, after that, only decide for a community? Or is this too much effort?
Yeah. Basically, the problem today is that we would love to be able to select sites through thorough studies that we do at the very beginning of the development phase. But today, there is no funding for development, either private or public. So it means that all of the development costs for mini-grids have to be borne by the operator itself. And the operator, we're working on very tight margins again. So we don't have like hundreds of thousands of dollars to spend on site selections at the beginning of a process that will most likely take about 2 years. So that's one thing, is that we would love to, very difficult. Second thing, a bit quickly, is that this is a bit where we do expect, we both expect and are limited by government, and I think that's a good thing. Planification, where there is, in Benin, for example, they give you a list of sites, and they're like, these sites are open for mini-grid electrification, these sites are not. So you go where you're allowed to go, and I think that's fair, that's government. So yeah, site selection is a bit of an issue. Last thing I would say is that if you want your mini-grid to work, you need to be able to make it work in almost every village. And the key thing for that is most probably, it's a bit taboo, but undersizing it a little bit in the beginning to be able to have a clear opinion about what's the actual demand, and then reinvesting in it. Because if you're trying from the very start to have perfect size from your mini-grid, 90% of the time you're going to fail. So I would say I would be a little bit cautious about site selection. Again, like ideal world, of course. Truth is, it's a bit not on the table for us.
Yes, please, thank you. Allow me to respond to that question as well. It's a very important point that you raise, and that's why when I brought up the ecosystem earlier on, the most important component of the ecosystem that we built under the Access to Energy platform is the NGO. Because let's all agree, we can have however money we want, we can have the technology, we can have the technical expertise, but if we have nowhere to go with the solution, then that does not help. So you do need an NGO as a critical part of your ecosystem that understands the community and that has worked in the community and is familiar with the community. My colleague here made a short statement, and I don't know if it was intended to come out or meant to come across as that, but he used the term decide for the community. No one decides for the community. The community decides for the community. And if you don't have community buy-in and you have community support, you will fail 100% of the time. Your solution starts with the community, And this is where your social expert comes in. They have the understanding of the community, they have the trust of the community, and they have the buy-in and the input of the community, which is the most important thing, because you can build a microgrid in a community and they will refuse to use it productively or not. But the system will not work unless you have the buy-in of the community. And that's why I go back to the initial point that you asked, why are we failing? There's an essential part of the ecosystem that you are missing. Actually, my friend Kai there does access to education, which is another key part to this ecosystem, is capacity building. Who's going to build all these systems and maintain all these systems? So if you want to create a perfect ecosystem, add the access to education part to it. But if you leave the community and access to the community through an NGO or a social expert out of your ecosystem, you will fail 100% of the time.
I think we all agree that we need to understand the social and socioeconomics of the community, and I saw Patricia nodding, right? And I think we all agree on that. But I also believe that we may have identified, thanks for your question, may have identified a funding gap, right? Because if we succeed in finally connecting the rural products to larger markets, right? And then bring the mini-grid companies, the electricity suppliers to these areas, work together with the communities, right? Of course, in close collaboration and of course, in a socially friendly manner, I believe we can actually make use of these products, channel cash flows into the communities, drive rural development, local development to the benefit of not only the community, but also the product industry and the electricity supplier. All right, any other questions, any other comments?
I have maybe, because
Katja,
that was the
please go
second
ahead.
part of the question addressed to the investors. I think, thanks for the question. You phrased it somehow like, are we pushing the wrong people into productive use? I'm paraphrasing here. As an investor in green mini-grids, if we see a business model that works without productive use, we would still finance it. It's not that we're forcing, I hope at least not part of our investment team or somewhere here in the audience, I don't think we're forcing our green mini-grid operators per se into adding productive use of electricity, but in reality and in practice, a lot of business models are not working without productive use. There need to be some kind of anchor clients, and we've seen it in the past that clients that were supposed to be anchor clients are not actually anchoring in reality, meaning that the selection of productive use equipments or clients are not necessarily increasing demand certainty. They might be increasing demand and they might be increasing revenues and cash flow at a specific point of time, but not necessarily demand certainty and revenue certainty, specifically when we're talking about adding productive use equipment in the agri-processing, because the clients are then often very much dependent on market conditions, on harvesting, so they are not necessarily the most stable clients in terms of providing a stable demand across the year. So thus, yeah,
And I think you touched a very sensitive point, Katja, because like delivering productive use equipment to site and deploying it to production, right, is not what we need, right? What we need actually is the ecosystem around, like the understanding of the value chains, and then putting the right processing equipment at the right spot into the right value chains with the right off-taker, preferably reliable long-term off-taker. All right, any further questions? Any further comments? Please come forward. Your opportunity. Over there. Can we have a microphone over there?
Thank you. Hello, Vivien, representing INENSUS Foundation. I've been out for 10 or 15 minutes, so maybe this question has been come up, so sorry if that's the case. The one question that I have is about how do you see the role of policy? Because one problem that I see in that approach is generally that we have ministries of agriculture and ministries of energy, which generally have different policies and regulation and so on. And I believe for that integrated approach, we need also from the policy side to look at that, because there are challenges that that are challenging each other because they can be contradicting policies from the agriculture perspective and the energy perspective. And I don't know if that has been touched in the discussion already. Possibly not.
No, it has not been touched. Rosalit, may I ask, forward that question to you. How much are you exposed or aggrieved by certain policies? How much do policies impact your business?
100%. Yeah,
all right.
Because we run the business in Kenya, so everything is regulatory just surrounding that. I'm not very, very conversant with the policies around the energy sector, but I know for sure that the prices are usually affected by the policies. So from where I sit, the prices just go up because certain policies are not put in place. So just to answer his question, policy for us is everything. Like our costs of energy go up because there's that. I was actually discussing something maybe 10 minutes before I got into the room, and someone was telling me, again, I don't know which country it is, but they were telling me that if you have solar plants in your organization and you overproduce, there's a system where that can be taken back to the grid. I do not have very technical terms, but I believe that's so. But we've ever been in that situation before, and that wasn't the case for us. So whether we overproduce or not, it doesn't help. And when we asked the team, from the regulatory body, they told us that that's not their policy. So that's a policy that affected our pockets at the time. It still affects it.
Yeah.
Yes.
On the agricultural side, on the milk supply side, how do policies affect that? Because after all, what we are looking for is a way for the ministries to collaborate. How much impact, how much what type of lever does a Ministry of Agriculture, for example, have on your business?
In the recent past, the Ministry of Agriculture has actually been very, very involved with the dairy sector, because our prefect or police is KDB, Kenya Dairy Board, and again, in the last, I think, 5 years, they've really been taking sustainability quite seriously. So from a quality perspective to water usage, which is a very big thing in their strategy, they have a 10-year strategy. So I would say we're not there yet, but we do feel their presence these days. Like we have the dairy sector being represented, and certain things, I think any Kenyan in here probably remembers in 2024 during the finance bill era, in between the year, there was a lot of pushback, there was a lot of pushback in a specific, I'm trying to put my words very carefully here. There was a lot of pushback in a certain aspect of the act that would have made milk quite expensive. So, and that actually happened. So I would say that we do feel their presence, the KDB presence. I'm not very conversant with every other agricultural sector, but I think if their bodies did what the KDB or KTDA, which is quite big in the country, does, I think that would make an impact for the farmers, including the smaller ones.
Yeah, I think now the question is, can we find a scenario under which a close collaboration of the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Energy, if they work together, they will facilitate rural processing of milk or cooling of milk or these kind of things?
Oh, absolutely. I was speaking somewhere else 2 months ago, and one of the things I said is I really do wish that our government would just bring all the ministries together. Sometimes I feel like they really are for the people in most occasions, but there's not a lot of communication in between that. The way we're saying that we thought that we are an ecosystem, but now we're realizing there are gaps. That's the same way. Because you'll have one regulation under one ministry and then another regulation in another ministry. And then at the end of the day, it feels like it's probably like double taxation, or it's the same policy that has been split into two, and you have to get licenses for certain things that are one and the same thing. So I think more collaboration would really help us as a country.
All right, on the licensing side, on the taxation side.
Yes,
okay.
on all that, yeah.
All right.
If that comes together, we'd be in a good place.
Let's have a final round of statements, comments, right? Maybe Katja, do you want to start?
Yeah, maybe we're also adding to that question on policy. Also from an investor's point of view, that's obviously crucial. We need like certainty that policies don't change from today to tomorrow as an investor as well. We need certainty that actually our operators know the rules in their countries they are working in. So actually we announced this morning something that we supported in a mapping of regulation in the ENS space in our partner countries, trying to support our grantees and actually understanding what they're signing up for if they are operating in specific countries. So yeah, I do believe there needs to be more alignment and cooperation between the ministries, but if only the ministries speaking to each other, that will not solve anything. There needs to be the investors and the operators and the manufacturers and the agricultural processing companies at the table to ensure that the ministries actually do understand the reality of the sector.
All right, thank you. Konai, your final statement in one sentence.
On behalf of Schneider Electric, keep promoting collaboration. Our ecosystem is built on it. We've had huge success based on collaboration, and it's stop working in isolation, start working together, and start working towards the same goal, which is access to energy in the rural space.
Thank you. Mufadal, your final statement?
I think echoing on what he said, to make this ecosystem work and for energy to have value, it's important for that collaboration to happen.
All right. Yeah?
Yeah, well, maybe strike a little bit of different note than what I've been saying earlier, because still PUEs are maybe the most interesting part of our job, and that's why we started mini-grid businesses. It's not exactly to sell kilowatt hours, but really to drive use of electricity. So nothing more exciting than seeing the electricity being used, but just what I'm trying to underline is that I've heard sometimes comments about, well, if you want mini-grid to work, or if you want it to work at this tariff, then you only have to implement PUEs and then you'll gain 20% demand in 5 years. That's not what's going to happen. And secondly, do you know what that actually takes? Do you know what it actually takes to shift from selling electricity to selling dozens of equipment in far-off countries, far-off areas? So let's be a little bit realistic, let's be a little bit cautious, and let's try to be really straight to the point about what we're trying to do.
Rosalit.
Moving from the manufacturers into finance, I can't get Patricia's numbers out of my head. And the first thing that came to my mind was the Equity Bank story. Back in the days when small farmers were not allowed to bank in certain banks because they were not able to get a certain threshold of money. And what I'm thinking right now is, I don't know how it's gonna get done, but whomever hacks the financing of the pro-poor financing, in Patricia's words, is gonna be the Equity Bank 10 years from now. They're like one of the largest banks in Kenya. I think the person who's going to hack that, or the organization that hacks the financing of the smallholder farmers, the 90% that we saw that's going to be the company we'll be speaking about 10, 15 years from now.
All right. So we've heard more collaboration. We need actually to fill this final gap between the off-takers of the rural products and the electricity supplier. And there may even be a funding gap that needs to be closed on the development of that linkage. Thank you all for your participation, and please a round of applause for my panel today. Thank you.